When someone starts to ignore you, especially someone you've emotionally invested in, the temptation to chase is almost irresistible. The silence is unnerving. It feels like a vacuum that must be filled, like a puzzle that must be solved. You want to reach out, explain yourself, demand acknowledgement, clarify where you stand. But the very moment you give in to that impulse, you've already given something away, your center of gravity. You've handed over your emotional equilibrium to someone who, at that very moment, has shown they're not willing to offer you even basic presence. And that is precisely where most people go wrong. They react instead of respond, and they do it from a place of fear, not strength. There's something profoundly disempowering about chasing someone who is actively choosing to ignore you. Because you're not just pursuing their attention, you're admitting, often without realizing it, that their recognition is worth more than your self-respect. You're signaling that you're dependent on their engagement for your sense of worth. And once you've crossed that line, it's incredibly difficult to return to a place of emotional authority. She knows you're rattled, she knows you're on edge, and the more you try to reinsert yourself into her awareness, the more you reinforce the dynamic that she is the prize and you are the pursuer. But here's what needs to be understood. Ignoring someone is an act of power. It communicates dominance, whether intentional or not. It says, I decide when and if you're worthy of my attention. And if you respond by chasing, pleading, or even justifying yourself, you're validating her perceived power. You're confirming that her silence is effective. So instead of reclaiming your dignity, you're participating in a game where you're always one move behind. That's no way to live, that's no way to love, and it's certainly no way to lead. What you must do in that moment, however painful, is nothing. Not passive nothing, active nothing. You choose not to chase. You sit with the discomfort. You allow the silence to exist, and instead of seeing it as a void to be filled, you use it as a mirror. What is this silence really revealing about you, about her, about the dynamic between you? There's power in restraint, and the man who resists the urge to chase is the man who begins to regain control, not of her, but of himself. And that is infinitely more valuable. The path forward is not to react, but to return to yourself, to recalibrate, to remind yourself that someone's attention is not a currency you're supposed to beg for. Your value doesn't fluctuate based on who sees it in a given moment. So you pull your energy back. You stop scanning your phone. You stop analyzing her last message or lack of one. You stop rehearsing what you'll say if she finally responds. And instead, you begin to anchor yourself in something unshakable. Your own discipline, your own focus, your own purpose. You return to the structure of your life. You become obsessed with your direction again, your mission, your body, your mind. You rebuild the routines that keep you grounded. You lift heavy things. You create. You improve. Because if she's not talking to you, let that space become a sanctuary for self-mastery, not a torture chamber of overthinking. Your attention is sacred. Your energy is valuable. Don't waste it trying to get back into someone's view when you should be deepening your own vision. And maybe that silence lasts. Maybe it stretches into days or weeks or longer. But here's the twist. Eventually, if you hold your frame, if you don't budge, she will notice. She will start to wonder. Because people are used to their patterns working. They're used to emotional leverage. When you break that script, you disturb their expectations. And suddenly the silence isn't empowering her anymore, it's confronting her. It's forcing her to reckon with the fact that you are no longer reacting the way she thought you would. But even then, even if she returns, you must resist the urge to see that as a victory. It's not about whether she comes back. It's about who you became in her absence. Did you fold? Did you chase? Or did you rise? That's the real test. That's the real answer to her silence. So when she ignores you, don't crumble. Don't react. Don't try to prove your worth. Just breathe, recenter, focus, elevate. Because the man who can sit in silence and still stand in strength, that's the man she won't forget. When someone ignores you, especially someone you've let into your emotional world, your first instinct might be to assume something's wrong with you. You begin questioning yourself, did I say something wrong? Did I come on too strong? Am I not good enough? But the reality is far simpler and far more powerful than all of that. Her silence is not confusion, it's communication. It's not a riddle to be solved, it's a message being sent. And once you start interpreting it through that lens, everything changes. People don't ignore by accident. Ignoring is a choice. Whether it's passive-aggressive or calculated, it serves a purpose. That purpose might be to test your reaction, to assert dominance, to punish you, or simply to create space because of their own emotional immaturity. But either way, it speaks volumes. The key is to stop personalizing that silence. When you make her silence about your worth, you're playing a dangerous game. You're placing the foundation of your self-esteem on someone else's willingness to communicate. And that's the fastest way to spiral into insecurity. Silence can be many things, but it's never neutral. It's either a message of avoidance, indifference, manipulation, or in rare cases, genuine overwhelm. But you must understand, if someone values you, they don't make you guess. They don't leave you in the dark, especially not repeatedly. A person who respects your time, your energy, your emotional investment, they communicate. It might not always be perfect, it might not always be smooth, but it's present. So when someone ignores you, you have to recognize that as a statement, not a mystery. You don't need to analyze every detail of the last conversation. You don't need to reread messages or consult friends like they're decoding ancient symbols. The silence itself is the answer. And that answer tells you more about her than it does about you, because mature people don't play hide and seek with their presence. They show up, they speak up, they clarify. When someone disappears without explanation, that's not a reflection of your value. It's a reflection of their limit. So what do? You interpret the silence not as a sign to try harder, but as a moment to step back. You ask yourself, what kind of person do I want in my life? Do I want someone who disappears when it's inconvenient? Do I want someone who communicates through silence, through withholding, through distance? Or do I want someone who has the emotional capacity to handle connection even when things get tough? Because here's the trap most people fall into. They try to decode silence instead of confronting it. They try to make it mean something flattering, something romantic even. She's just figuring things out. She's probably overwhelmed. She just needs time. But ask yourself honestly, is that her pattern? Is this consistent with who she's shown herself to be? Or are you making excuses because the truth feels too uncomfortable to face? The truth is, ignoring is often a way to maintain control without confrontation. It's a power move designed to keep you uncertain, to keep you chasing, to keep you emotionally invested. And the more you chase clarity from someone who's unwilling to give it, the more you abandon yourself in the process. You betray your intuition, you silence your inner voice, all to hear something from someone who's already speaking loud and clear through absence. Now here's where your strength is tested. You can either take that silence as an insult, react emotionally, and spiral into self-doubt, or you can take it as an invitation to strengthen your boundaries, an invitation to build discernment, an invitation to stop making excuses for people who show you through their inaction exactly where they stand. This is where real self-respect is forged, not in how you respond when someone gives you love and attention, but in how you respond when they don't. Do you chase validation or do you return to your value? Do you interpret silence as rejection or as redirection? That choice determines everything. And if she does come back, and often they do, it's not because you chased her down or cracked the code, it's because you didn't. It's because you didn't hand her your power. It's because you didn't crumble. You saw her silence for what it was, and instead of reacting, you stood still. You stood tall. You chose dignity over desperation. The ability to see silence as information rather than rejection, that is emotional mastery. That is how you stop being someone who's constantly asking why and start becoming someone who decides what. What do I tolerate? What do I allow into my life? What do I deserve in terms of emotional availability? When she ignores you, hear it. Let it be what it is. Don't dress it up. Don't spin it into something softer. Let it clarify, not confuse. Because once you accept that silence is communication, you'll stop waiting for an answer you already have. It's easy to get pulled into power games when someone starts ignoring you. That kind of behavior isn't just random. It often signals a subtle challenge, a psychological tug-of-war to see who will bend first, who will react, who will break their composure. And the truth is, most people fail that test. They cave in, reach out, over-explain, or lash out emotionally, all in the hope of ending the silence or regaining control. But the real control isn't in reacting. It's in refusing to play the game altogether. But someone ignores you deliberately, they're trying to get a reaction. It might be rooted in insecurity, or maybe in some learned pattern of manipulation, but the goal is almost always the same: destabilize your sense of certainty, create tension, make you feel uncertain about where you stand, and force you into proving your worth, proving your place, proving that you still care. And the moment you take that bait, when you start performing for validation, you've already surrendered something fundamental: your emotional sovereignty. Now, that doesn't mean you become cold or indifferent. It means you become aware. You see the dynamic for what it is. You recognize the signs: inconsistent communication, mixed signals, passive-aggressive distance followed by sudden warmth. These are strategies designed to keep you off balance. And the people who use them know exactly what they're doing, maybe not in an overt, malicious way, but through deeply ingrained patterns that reward them with attention and control. The only way to win is not to engage. Refusing to participate doesn't mean you pretend not to care. It means you care about something more: your peace, your clarity, your emotional integrity. You draw a line not with anger, but with indifference. You don't need to declare it. You don't need to make a dramatic exit. You just don't play. And that silence, your calm, grounded refusal to react, becomes louder than any outburst. It communicates a message far stronger than words: I'm not available for game. And here's something important to realize. When you don't play the game, you force the other person to confront themselves. That's incredibly uncomfortable for someone who relies on control through emotional manipulation. When you don't respond to the bait, when you don't flinch, when you don't chase or plead or lash out, you disrupt the cycle. You stop feeding the system that rewards drama and chaos. And suddenly they're the one who's exposed. They're the one left questioning. That reversal is powerful, not because it punishes, but because it clarifies. And sometimes that clarity leads to resolution. They may recognize the futility of the game and step forward with honesty. But even if they don't, you've already won something far more important than their approval. You've preserved your self-respect. You've stayed aligned with your values. You've chosen stability over submission. But this only works if you mean it. You can't fake detachment. You can't pretend not to care while secretly obsessing over their next move. The internal must match the external. You truly have to let go of the outcome. You have to be okay with silence, with ambiguity, with the discomfort that comes from not knowing what happens next, because that's where your strength is built, in that space between stimulus and response. That space is where you decide who you are. And this is not just about relationships. This is about every area of your life. Every time someone tries to test you through silence, through withdrawal, through power play, you face a choice. You can become reactive, emotionally entangled, and easily manipulated, or you can become still. You can observe without engaging. You can hold your frame. You can let the dust settle without chasing the storm. What you're doing when you refuse to participate is building an identity that is not dependent on external behavior. You're anchoring yourself in values, not validation. And you're doing something incredibly rare in a world addicted to reaction. You're choosing composure. And that composure terrifies people who rely on chaos to maintain control, because it shows them that they don't have the power they thought they had. So when she ignores you and the silence starts to stretch and your ego begins to itch for attention, stop, breathe, don't fall for the test, don't take the bait. Don't try to decode the game, just opt out, let her play alone. Because the person who needs silence to feel powerful is already powerless. And your refusal to participate is the most powerful answer you could ever give. When someone ignores you, the natural instinct is to do something about it, to send a message, to demand an answer, to get closure, to somehow make sense of the silence. But one of the most overlooked and underestimated responses in these situations is to rise in your purpose, to direct all that energy that would have been wasted on chasing, questioning, or waiting, into something that sharpens you, builds you, clarifies who you are. Because when you make your life about more than someone else's behavior, you stop being at the mercy of it. The mistake people make when they're being ignored is letting it dominate their thoughts. They orbit around it like it's the center of their existence. They play out conversations that never happen, write replies they'll never send, obsess over timelines and digital signals. But none of that brings peace. None of it brings clarity. It just drains your time, your energy, your sense of self. And the tragedy is that all of that attention could be fueling something far more important, your growth, your goals, your mission. Think about it. What would happen if you took every thought you've wasted wondering why she's gone silent and reinvested that into your fitness, your craft, your education, your business? What would your life look like if the same energy you gave to overanalyzing her distance was redirected into developing yourself? Because here's the truth. When you're deeply engaged in becoming better, you don't have time to obsess over those who can't see your value. You're too busy building a life they won't be able to ignore. Purpose gives you insulation. It shields you from emotional instability because it gives your mind something worthy to fixate on. Without purpose, you're vulnerable to every small rejection, every ghosted message, every inconsistency. You become emotionally reactive, bouncing between highs and lows based on other people's attention. But with purpose, you create stability. You start controlling your focus, and your focus is everything. Your focus determines your habits, your growth, your momentum, and ultimately, your outcome. Now, some people hear that and think it's about distraction, that working on your purpose is just a way to avoid the pain. But it's not avoidance, it's transformation. Pain doesn't go away by sitting in it endlessly. Pain becomes power when you channel it, when you refuse to let it paralyze you and instead let it push you. That silence you're hearing, that absence, it's a signal. Not a signal to chase her, but a signal to chase yourself, to pursue the highest version of who you are, not because you need to prove something to her, but because you owe it to yourself. There's something magnetic about a person who's locked in on a mission. They don't beg for attention. They command respect. They don't explain themselves. They embody their truth. And when someone like that gets ignored, they don't flinch. They move forward. Because they know they don't need to fight for space in someone else's life when they're already building a life that speaks for itself. That's the energy you need to embrace, not bitterness, not revenge, not desperation, just silent, focused elevation. And the beauty of it is, as you grow in your purpose, you begin to see people differently. The ones who ignored you, you stop idolizing them. You start seeing them with clarity, not fantasy. You realize that anyone who can't communicate with basic respect was never going to support the life you're building anyway, and suddenly you're grateful. Grateful for the silence because it redirected your path. It forced you to dig deeper. It exposed the cracks in your self-worth so you could fill them with something real. Discipline, vision, progress. What happens next is not your concern. Whether she circles back or stays gone doesn't matter, because by then you'll be too far ahead to even care. You'll be too invested in your future to be haunted by your past. And the irony, the moment you stop trying to be noticed is the moment you become impossible to ignore. Not because you chased attention, but because you became undeniable. You became someone who doesn't just survive rejection, but thrives in its aftermath. You were never meant to sit around waiting for someone to choose you. You were meant to rise in the silence, to build in the dark, to become the kind of man who doesn't chase validation because he's too busy chasing vision. One of the most damaging things you can do when someone ignores you is to internalize it as a reflection of your worth. It's a dangerous spiral. You start to think, maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I wasn't interesting enough. Maybe I said something wrong, did something wrong, or simply wasn't worth a reply. That kind of thinking can poison your confidence and destabilize your entire identity. But here's the truth. Someone else's silence is not a measurement of your value. It's a reflection of their capacity, their mindset, their emotional maturity, or lack thereof. And it says far more about them than it ever will about you. When you allow someone's behavior to define your self-worth, you're handing over your power. You're outsourcing your identity to a person who couldn't even offer you basic communication. And that's the real tragedy. Not the silence itself, but what you allow the silence to do to you internally. Because the person ignoring you might not even be aware of the storm they've triggered in your mind. And even if they are, it changes nothing. Your self-worth cannot be negotiated based on the presence or absence of someone's attention. Now, this is not about ego. It's not about pretending you're above being hurt. You're human. You feel pain. You feel confusion. You feel longing. That's real. But what you do with that pain is what separates strength from weakness. Do you let it erode your sense of self, or do you use it as a moment to anchor yourself deeper into who you truly are? Because every time you're ignored, every time you're dismissed, you're being given a choice. Allow it to make you smaller, or use it to remind yourself that your value doesn't vanish just because someone failed to see it. This is where emotional discipline matters. You have to resist the urge to perform for validation. Don't fall into the trap of proving yourself. Don't start trying harder to get their attention, to make them respond, to win them back. That's the game they want you to play, the game where they control the pace and you beg for scraps. And the more you play that game, the further you drift from your center, the further you drift from the man you were meant to be. You can't control whether someone values you. You can only control how much you value yourself. And that's the mindset you need to adopt. If someone can't recognize your worth, your time, your energy, your effort, they were never meant to have access to it in the first place. You don't lower your standards just because someone refuses to meet them. You raise your awareness and you move on accordingly. Understand something critical. Rejection, especially silent rejection, has a purpose. It teaches you to detach your identity from other people's decisions. It forces you to develop a deeper foundation of self-esteem that isn't dependent on external responses. And once you've tasted that kind of independence, you stop tolerating situations that make you question yourself. You stop entertaining people who can't even give you the dignity of clear communication. Letting go of the need to be acknowledged is not weakness. It's maturity. It's strength. It means you've reached a point where your sense of self is no longer held hostage by anyone else's recognition. You don't need closure. You don't need clarity from them. You create your own closure by deciding your value is intact regardless of what anyone else does or doesn't. So what begins to happen when you operate from that mindset is powerful. You stop being reactive. You stop making emotional decisions based on fear of being forgotten or unloved. Instead, you become intentional. You choose who you give access to. You filter who gets your energy. You no longer beg to be seen. You choose to be selective with your presence. That shift changes everything. Because once you stop trying to fix what's outside of your control and start protecting what's within your control, your focus, your peace, your energy, you step into a different kind of confidence. Not arrogance, not performance-driven posturing. Real confidence. Quiet, steady, unwavering. The kind that doesn't chase. The kind that attracts. So when you're being ignored, don't spiral into insecurity. Don't collapse inward. Rise. Strengthen your boundaries. Reaffirm your value. And remember, you are not defined by the silence of others. You are defined by how you choose to respond to it. Silence can feel like an insult. It can sting in a way that words never could. Because it's not just what's missing, it's the message you imagine in the absence. When someone ignores you, especially someone you care about, it can ignite a storm of assumptions that you're not good enough, that you're not interesting enough, that you're disposable. And if you're not careful, those assumptions become your inner truth. You start carrying the weight of someone else's neglect as if it's evidence against your worth. But here's the reality. Your value does not fluctuate based on someone else's inability to see it. You don't prove your worth by chasing silence. You don't reclaim your dignity by trying harder to be heard. What you do is this: you hold your ground. You demonstrate emotional strength through non-reactivity. That is where true power lies. Because the more someone tries to provoke a reaction by withdrawing, the more control they exert when you chase. And the only way to take that control back is to respond with discipline, not desperation. To let the silence remain, and in that silence to build yourself quietly into someone unshakable. This is about composure, not coldness. It's not about shutting down emotionally or pretending you don't care. It's about refusing to be manipulated by inconsistency. You can care and still walk away. You can feel hurt and still maintain your standards. What you don't do is surrender your self-respect just because someone else withdrew theirs. Emotional maturity is when you feel the pull to react, to lash out, to demand an answer, and instead you center yourself and you choose stillness, not as a passive act, but as an assertion of inner strength. And this is especially hard when you're dealing with someone who has conditioned you to seek validation from them. The silence becomes a trigger, a form of punishment. You're not just being ignored, you're being tested. They want to see if you'll break character, if you'll chase, plead, or collapse. But when you respond with silence of your own, not out of bitterness, but out of strength, you break the cycle. You show that your identity isn't fragile, that you don't crumble under the weight of someone else's indifference. It's not easy. The urge to reach out, to explain yourself, to reestablish the connection, it's strong. But what's stronger is the long-term damage of compromising your integrity to chase someone who made a choice to exclude you. Every time you respond to silence with emotional neediness, you reinforce their power and diminish your own. But every time you respond with grounded stillness, you reinforce your self-respect, and that is far more valuable than temporary connection. The truth is, people treat you based on what you tolerate. If you reward disrespect with attention, they'll give you more disrespect. If you meet inconsistency with loyalty, they'll feed you more inconsistency. But when you respond to silence with self-discipline, when you protect your energy like it actually matters, people notice. They may not admit it, they may pretend not to care, but trust me, they notice. Because most people expect you to fold, they expect you to break down. When you don't, it disrupts their narrative. It forces them to confront your strength. Now that doesn't mean they'll come running back, and it doesn't mean they'll change. That part isn't up to you. What is up to you is how you evolve from the experience. You either use the silence to spiral into self-doubt, or you use it to sharpen your emotional discipline. One weakens you, the other transforms you. And transformation always happens in solitude, real transformation. Not the kind where you pretend to be fine while secretly obsessing, but the kind where you face the discomfort, accept the silence, and rise in spite of it. You become the person who no longer needs to be understood to stay centered, who no longer needs closure to move forward, who no longer needs attention to feel validated. That kind of person is rare. And because they're rare, they command respect, not by demanding it, but by embodying it. They don't explain themselves. They don't justify their silence. They don't play the game. They simply live with intention and let their presence speak louder than any words could. When someone ignores you, they expect you to chase. Let them expect it. Then disappoint them with your peace.